Well, 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 it's wonderful to be here with you today, Laura. I have been so looking forward to this conversation. I'm a fan of your work. Whenever I listen, read, watch all of your work, the insights just come straight at me, hits me in the head. And then it's also so real. Yes, it's empowering, it's ambitious, but actually it's real. It's not this sort of fluff that I can sometimes get frustrated with. It's like, that's not how the real world works. You really capture it so brilliantly and so incisively. And of course, you talk about creating people who feel limitless, the name of your first book, whilst also managing the Wonderhell that accompanies it, which is the name of your second books, both books full of stories, frameworks, tools, everything. I mean, they're fantastic and I highly recommend them. We're going to talk about both of those concepts. And I know you are a veteran, if that's the right term, of all of these sorts of shows. And you've been on networks all across the US and no doubt further afield. But you haven't been on Lancefield on the Line. So you left the best till last. And welcome to the show, he says with a dose of humor.
I hope it's not last. I hope I'll be making it past today. But I am excited because I know you talk to a lot of really incredible guests. So I'm honored to be amongst the cohort.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And it probably doesn't come to you. When you say a word and you think that's the wrong word, and it's definitely not the last. It'll be many more to come, many more to come. So, hey, success is a double-edged sword. So it feels good, can feel difficult. And I felt that sometimes. And yes, listeners, I have had a few successes along the way, contrary to popular belief. But the question I have, just to kick us off, is I see people and know people who are very successful on any measure, and they don't look as though they're having a hard time. So what's going on with them? What are they doing?
Well, I think they're faking a lot of the happiness, if we're going to be just straight up from the beginning. Like, we live in a world that is dominated by social media, and people get to show whatever they want to show. And so often we're just seeing everybody's highlight reels. Look, I spent 20 years in executive search, and it was my job to call the most successful people on the planet, right? I was the most successful people and recruit them away on behalf of my clients. And so I would call them because they were super successful, but despite all that success, they weren't very happy, which is why they all called me back. Right. So, of course, everybody looks super happy on the outside, but I know the truth because it was my job to call them and ask them all sorts of personal questions and figure out exactly what excited them and exactly what frustrated them. And it turns out that there are very, very few people who have both unbridled success and endless fulfillment, right? That just doesn't exist. And it's mostly because every time we achieve some version of success, we see a version of ourselves we never thought possible. And inside of that version, we had an increased hunger, a faster pace, bigger goals. And inside of that, then we also find stress and uncertainty and doubt and exhaustion and envy and burnout and all of these emotions. And so anybody who's telling you that they are super successful and super happy, well, then they're just at the end of their growth. And why would you ever want to be there? Right. Yeah, so Wonderhell only presents itself to people who are worthy of it, which is kind of cool, but also not that liberating.
So in the last literally 90 seconds, you've captured, in essence, your book and the conversation. But we're going to carry on. The question I have linked to that is, if you are on the edge of your comfort zone, which is the term you use, how do you use all of the feelings you just eloquently described as sort of rocket fuel to the next stage, to the next adventure, rather than becoming overwhelmed? Because I have seen people in both camps, people who are very successful, but just got to that, whether it's that burnout or imposter syndrome kicked in. So I've had enough, and actually took quite a break from whatever ladder they were on. So how do you get the right balance? And how do you see it as a catalyst?
Sure. Well, I want to say first and foremost that if you are at that point where you need that break, like taking the break is not wrong, right? It's not wrong. And in fact, in Limitless, I talk a lot about sometimes the people who step to the side or step backwards actually ended up stepping forward even faster after. So sometimes we do need to take that break and recalibrate. I've had so many times in my career, whether it was dropping out of law school and joining a presidential campaign, or leaving the White House in the middle of 2 administrations that nobody does, going to work for the marquee search firm, and then leaving that after making vice president, which nobody does, to start my own firm, and then selling that firm when I was at the top of my game, and I could have just mailed it in for the next 20 years. But I I continued to step off of the ladder because there was always another more interesting ladder that I would see beyond. And there's a great Whitney Johnson, who you may have interviewed, one of the great business thinkers, has this thing that she calls the beginner's mindset, this sort of S curve, where at the beginning of the S curve, you have no idea what you're doing. It's sort of flat, it's hard, you're getting punched in the face left and right, and then you kind of start climbing up the S, and you're like, oh, I think I know what I'm doing. This is amazing. I've got some success. I'm figuring it out. And then you get to the top, and you're like, yeah, I know what I'm doing. And you start mailing it in a little bit, and you become complacent, and you start to self-sabotage. And when I interviewed her for Wonderhell, I was like, self-sabotage? Nobody self-sabotages at the top of the S curve. This can't be right. And she asked me to tell her a story about a time that, maybe I mailed it in a little bit and I got kind of lucky, and I did. And as I was telling her the story, I was like, oh no, like it's absolutely true. And in that moment where I mailed it in, like I got really lucky because I'd been doing this work for 15 years at that point, and I could kind of delve into my bag of tricks, and I could fake it a little bit until I sort of got to the point where I knew enough about what was going on that I could reflect back what the client was saying. And as I walked out of that meeting, I was like, oh, this is bad. Like if that hadn't gone well, it would have been bad for me, for the client, for my people, for our reputation. And as I was telling her the story, I thought, oh yeah, that's true. And so, as I look back on my career, I continued to jump off the ladder because you can't be insatiably hungry for someone else's goals. And at each point, the goal that I was chasing was no longer mine. It was somebody else's. So that's the first piece that I want to address. The second is this question of, what do we do with these emotions that come at us, right? We're in a room we've never been in before. We have a goal we never thought we'd want to have before. Suddenly there's this prize that's ahead of us that we didn't even know existed, or maybe we didn't think was for us. And suddenly we're like, I kind of want that, right? Like ego is there and it's good and we like it. And like, maybe it's all right to be ambitious. And so when I found myself in this position, I interviewed 100 different glass ceiling shatterers, Olympic medalists, startup unicorns, thinkers, creatives, philanthropists, artists, like everyday people like us. And I wanted a way out. I was like, how do I deal with these emotions? And what I learned from them, which was really horrifying, but also actually liberating, was that they didn't actually quiet the emotions. They listened to them and they learned from them. They renegotiated the relationship with them. And so instead of saying, oh, I'm an imposter, maybe I should leave. Oh, I have a syndrome, maybe I should lay down. They went, how cool that I'm at a place I've never been before. It's not I've never done this before, but I've never done this before. And I like to think that my work is based on 30 years of experience, of 3 million bits of data from 10,000 responses from a global survey I've been running for the last 6 years. I like to think that it's based in actual gravitas and heft, but this one simple mindset shift, I've never done this before, to I've never done this before, allowed the people that I spoke to not to feel imposter syndrome as a diagnosis, but as a badge of honor. It allowed them not to hear these voices in their head warning them as a limitation, but actually an invitation. And so they were able to say, oh, it's actually not, I've never done this before. Oh no, I'm filled with trepidation and uncertainty and potential failure and embarrassment and finale, but it's actually, I've never done this before. So this is education and trial and error and experimentation, and what an adventure this is going to be. And that changed everything for them.
Wow. When they were making that shift into the unknown, but actually looking for something that I guess is more about them and their own goals, what did you learn about the process in which you've done it? Because these are big decisions. Some people, it's all about listening to themselves, their intuition. Some people use a whole army of people around them. I'm not suggesting there's one way, but were there any patterns of how they make such a decision? Because afterwards, hindsight's a wonderful thing. Oh yes, I felt it was the right time. But actually in that moment, it can be it can take a lot from us. So anything about the process?
There are multiple ways to do it. I mean, some people stopped and they asked themselves, is this a goal I actually care about? Right? Because like when you're 15, 16, 17 years old, somebody says, pick a path, pick a major, pick university, pick a trade. And you're like, okay. But we don't have frontal lobes when we have to make these decisions, right? Your frontal lobe doesn't exist for like 10 more years after you've had to make this decision that's going to affect the very rest of our lives. And so some of the people that I spoke to actually stopped and they said like, well, that was my goal then. Is it my goal now? Do I actually really care about this thing? Is it worth the exhaustion and the envy and the uncertainty and all the stuff I have to deal with in order to get it? On the other side of this success, will I get more of this? And do I want that? Or am I going to be able to make different decisions? So they really stopped and they asked themselves, do I actually still care about this thing at this life phase, at this, at this age? Maybe they were married, maybe they were divorced, maybe they had kids, maybe they're empty nesters. Like life changes, right? The world changes. So they asked themselves if they actually cared about it. They also asked themselves what their values were. Right. So the road to your unbridled success is going to go through those values, because the values are how you renegotiate your relationship with all of the uncertainty that you're feeling. What do I care about? Who do I want to be? What kind of values do I want to manifest in the world? And does this thing allow me to do that? Some of them looked at finances and they said, well, there's the need to make number and the want to make number. The need to make number is what I need to make to pay my bills, to pay for my kids, to put food on the table, to squirrel away, specific amounts of money for retirement. But the want to make numbers, how many vacations do I take and where do I get to go? Am I going to drive a car? And how nice is that car? Do I give back to my community and how much, right? So in between those two, there were a lot of puts and takes. And so each of the people that I spoke to had a different way of thinking about whether or not they wanted to go and to do this next thing. And each time they would think through it, it became pretty clear to them who they wanted to become in this next iteration and who they needed to have surrounding them in order to get there.
It's a very skillful act. I mean, some people, I guess you build more muscle memory as you do it repeatedly over your life. But I know many people who are successful, even with all the emotional turmoil that goes with it. And when you ask them the questions, I haven't interviewed 100, but I know quite a few people who've gone through fairly high levels, and they go through and they ask them to talk about how consciously they did it. They struggle. They it sort of just happened. I know the people I needed around me. I knew that I could back myself and so forth, which is wonderful for them, but actually it's less teachable for the rest of us. But what about if you're somebody who may be listening to this podcast who's not feeling at their best, not necessarily feeling as successful as we're talking about? Perhaps life has dulled them to a degree, but they think actually there's a lot more to come. What would you advise them to do to sort of, I guess, give them a kickstart to help moving them closer to being at their best?
Yeah. So the last thing that people did in order to make these big decisions, which I thought was actually hilarious, is they just started acting. They just started moving forward.
Just having a go.
Spend a lot of time. Yeah, we spend a lot of time like, I can't do it. It's not perfect. I don't know. And it turns out that perfect is the enemy of the good, right? Like you're never going to move forward. I think there's two types of people. There are people who are uncertain and they curl up in a ball and they just wait and wait and wait because they have analysis paralysis. They're filled with anxiety. They don't really know. Or there are people who are uncertain and they just start to gather information. They just start to meet with some people and do a little bit of research and just some kind of action, and action beats stagnation. So my favorite study that I quote in Wonderhell is the coin flip study. And it was done by the Freakonomics guys. And the coin flip study says this: when given a choice, I have to make this big, huge decision. Do I get married? Do I take the job? Do I buy the house? Do I get divorced? Do I write? Like, I don't know what to do. There's no perfect decision. There's no perfect data set. You're never going to have all the information. You're never going to have a crystal ball. So how do you make the decision? People who flipped a coin and the coin said heads, go for it, versus tails, stay where you are, they were happier. 2 months after flipping the coin and going for it, they said they were no worse off. And 6 months later said they were substantially better off, even if they said in hindsight it was the wrong decision. How fascinating is that? 2 months later, no worse off. 6 months later, substantially better off, even if it was the wrong decision. Because the very process of making that decision allows you to start moving forward. It allows you to decide, what do I actually care about? What's worth the work? What am I learning along the way? Who am I meeting along the way? And it just gets you in the process of moving forward, so that everything that you learn, even if it's the wrong decision, informs the next path forward, so that it gets you to the place you want to be. Like, how many times have you heard stories about people saying, I went to a bar one night because I was going to meet this guy who I really wanted to date. And oh, it turns out that I ended up meeting this other guy. And now we've been married for 28 years. By the way, that's my story of how I met my husband. Or, I decided to take this job and, it was the wrong job. But on that job, I met this woman. This woman went on to become a vice president of this company. She brought me with her. And now right. So like you hear these stories, it's never this direct path. And I can tell you, I spent 20 years interviewing thousands of people, and the people who were the most interesting, actually people who the only people who were actually interesting were the ones who had left turns and right turns and U-turns, because that's how we become fuller, richer, more interesting, more knowledgeable people.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. And there's something about just getting on and getting out there and speaking with people, exploring you, that I guess invites people to join you, speak with you, challenge you along the way, rather than the opposite, where you can become smaller, where you shrink, where you look inside yourself too much, and becomes candidly self-indulgent and rather boring. I mean, I've come across a number of even good friends where it's like, come on, get over yourself. Just do something. Just get on with it. I've had this conversation like 50 times now. It's like version 50. Move on.
Yeah, well, so you should point to them. There's actual science about making your own luck. So we think some people are just born lucky, right? The same people that we look and we're like, oh, they seem so successful and so happy, right? We think that they're born lucky, but people aren't born lucky or unlucky. There's actual science behind it, right? There's science that says that people can make their own luck by acting like an introvert acts, by saying yes to more things, by assuming that things are going to work out, to look for the brighter side of everything, by turning mistakes into learning opportunities, right? It's hard. I'm an introvert. I'm an introvert of the highest order. Like I would rather like stay home all day and write books and hang out and snuggle my dog than like go outside of the house. And yet I know that opportunity is not going to cross my path sitting on my couch. So sometimes I have to go out. And when you go out, people remember that you're there. And then when an opportunity crosses their path the next day and it's not right for them, they're like, oh, you know who I saw last night, right? I saw Laura. I give her a call, right? But they wouldn't think of you otherwise. And so we have to you have to start moving forward or you'll never start moving forward.
Yes, yes. I mean, you talk about one of your superpowers being stubbornness and grit, determination for the ups and downs, the vicissitudes of life. If you're speaking to somebody who perhaps not necessarily down on their luck, but doesn't have the same determination for whatever reason, whether it's their makeup, their background, just their laziness, whatever the reasons why, but they recognize the power of that determination. Apart from getting on and doing it, if they're not feeling it, what advice, what counsel would you give to them?
Well, I said earlier that you can't be insatiably hungry for someone else's goals. And I think that if I had to put like 10 lessons I would give my children, like carved in stone, that would be one of them. Because I don't actually think that people are lazy or they're disinterested or they're disillusioned, or I think they just don't care about the thing they've been told they're supposed to care about. So, when I was in fourth grade, I had a teacher who told me that she was like, Laura, you're pretty argumentative. You'd be a great lawyer. So of course I told her she was wrong because, argumentative. But then I went home that day and I told my parents and they were like, yes, you should be a lawyer. And then I was watching LA Law or Ally McBeal or something. And it looked like kind of cool to be like a hot, sexy lady lawyer, right? Like that seemed to be the thing. And so I just assumed that I would do that. And I onboarded that goal as if my teacher had a crystal ball and knew exactly, she could look into my soul and know who I should be. She did. It was like a passing random phrase, like just fell out of her mouth one day. And yet I took it as if it was destiny. And I think so many of us do that, where somebody hands us a goal, not even a thoughtful goal, but they hand us a goal and we go, oh, okay, I guess that's what I'll do. And then we keep pursuing it and pursuing it and pursuing it and banging our head against the wall and feeling like failures when we can't make it happen, when in fact, maybe it's not meant for us. And so, like the worst piece of advice is like, follow your passion. Like, yeah, we should be passionate about what we do. But if somebody's like, follow your passion, that means like you find your passion and then you follow it and everything's going to be great, which means the first time things are hard, the first time things go wrong, the first time a client says no, the first time your favorite employee leaves, but the worst employee stays, you're like, oh, I guess that's not my passion. I should do something else. And let's like saying, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? Like, No, like what would you do if you knew for sure you would fail and yet you would want to do it over and over and
Yes,
over
that's
and
such a
over
good
and over
framing.
until you got it right because that's your passion. So like if you're feeling lazy, you're feeling uninspired, it's not because you're lazy or uninspired, it's because you have the wrong goal. Like fix
Yeah.
the goal, don't fix you. Like fix the goal first and then figure out if there's something actually wrong with you or not.
I love that. There's something about giving yourself permission, especially if you're in a big organization where often, whether we believe it or not, we're institutionalized. My sister, who's a psychiatrist, said after leaving a big consultancy, she said, "David, you're institutionalized." I said, "How dare you? I have my own agency. I'm very strong." And she said, "No, you've been there for 25 years. It's going to take a while for you to work out and actually use your own brain because there is." And it's a great organization, still is. There are paths. There are things you're expected to do. And effectively, I
A
have made
way of thinking.
decisions, right?
Mm-hmm.
You must become partner. You must make this amount of money. You must do it. It's like, I actually had to start to think for myself. I mean, it was shocking and it was brilliant and quite unsettling for all the reasons you set out. Let's shift
But it's
gears.
hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard. And you end up with this identity crisis. Like, who am I when I'm no longer, like, when I sold my company and I was no longer LGO CEO, like, who am I? And what are people going to think about me? And is it okay that I don't know? And I would walk into coffee shops and I'd see friends and they'd be like, what are you doing now? And I'd be like, I don't know. I'm figuring it out. And you would see this look of horror go across their face. Like they didn't know where to file me in their brain anymore. And so I felt like I had to immediately have a response.
Yes.
And so, but we don't. It's kind of okay to
Yeah. It took me a while to realize that. I realized that I was probably on the third ladder from the organization, the role, and then I'm David. And it's like, well, actually, for some people, it's like, and recognizing for some people, that's not enough. And it's like, okay, well, I'll hang out with some new people. Let's shift gears.
It also questions them and everything that they've not faced like, as well. So. Yes, but sorry, you wanted to shift gears. I apologize.
Like I thought we had an in-depth relationship. Actually, it was pretty superficial based on how much money I made for you. Yeah, okay, let's move on. Mm-hmm. Life's too short. A couple of scenarios then, just to shift gears a little bit. One is, imagine you are that person listening to this and you are at your A game. Everything feels good. You sort of realize you have a little tinges of self-doubt and imposter syndrome and so on, but it's not something you worry about. What would you say to them?
Oh, I mean, I think that if you're in that place where you are feeling consonant, right, where what you do matches who you are, you're having a great time, you're enjoying it, you're bringing your best every single day, I think that's great. I think it's wonderful. I think very few people have alignment and flow in that sort of way. But I would still challenge them to just make sure, that it's working on all parts, right? So like maybe they are at their A game at work. Are they in the A game at home as well? So the idea about having consonance, this alignment, this flow, where everything that you're doing sort of the energy is all going towards the right place. A lot of us are very good at doing that in one part of our life, but not necessarily the other part of our life. So really, like if you've got things working in one place and you are the kind of person you want to be, I would just ask, is that reflective of all the different parts of your life? Because how many times have we seen people who are like, they're crushing it at work, but they're getting divorced at home, right? Or, or like their kids don't talk to them, but they made partner this year. That's not a recipe for long-term fulfillment.
No, I agree. I remember having a conversation with the chairman of a very large organization, and he was just about to retire. I mean, success on absolutely every front professionally. And I said, so what are you most excited about next? And he said, I'm absolutely bricking myself. I have no idea. And all of the collateral damage just came. And he started crying in front of me, which for a British male of his age and type was, it's not something we obviously do, if you believe the caricature. The second, the second scenario, what if you're somebody who sort of come off, some success? The project's been won, but the pipeline looks a bit, you've had some great clients, but actually the market looks a little bit fallow. You're still confident in yourself, but you're in the zone of not sure what I'm going to do. What would you say to them?
I think it's a perfect time to stop and assess what you actually care about. What's next? And I speak about this from personal experience. When I sold my executive search firm, I founded and built and run and then sold a global executive search firm. And I was fairly certain what I wanted to do next. And I wasn't able to focus on it while I was running the company. So as soon as I finished running the company, I wanted to do venture capital because I was like, well, I founded a lot of things in my career and I've spent the last 20 years sizing people up. So I could
Mm.
probably look at like a startup plan and a startup CEO and like figure out whether or not they would be the person who could make it happen, right? I could go to follow that this would make sense. So I sold the company and then I went on this journey of interviewing with a lot of different VC firms. And what I realized is that I actually love the idea of venture capital, but I didn't really like a lot of the venture capitalists. And I didn't
Mm.
really know if I
Mm.
wanted to work for somebody else because I
Yes.
had just spent 15 years being my own boss. And I realized that I was probably fairly unemployable at this point because I'm used to being the final say. I was used
Yes.
to being
Yes.
the one who was the visionary. It was going to be a
Yeah.
little bit difficult to go from having the best job in the world to having the slightly less best job in the world for somebody else, right? At their whim and their mercurial in any way. And that was difficult because I didn't stop and ask myself, well, what do I really want to do? Where do I want to spend my
Right.
time? And so in
Right.
Limitless, I talk about consonance coming from these four factors: calling, connection, contribution, and control. Calling being this gravitational force that gets you
Mm.
up in the morning, right? The leader who you want to serve, the family you want to nurture, the business you want to build. So for me, calling was, I love being part of the like building of something exciting, right? Something revolutionary, something that's new. I'm an entrepreneur at heart. The second piece is connection. Does the work that you're doing on a daily basis connect to that calling? Does it help you? What's in your inbox, your calendar, your to-do list, and does it get you there? And so, as an entrepreneur, you're sometimes doing all the things all the time, and
Mm.
the challenge of an entrepreneur is to figure out how to do only the things that they should do, right? So that's
Yes.
the second piece. The third piece is contribution. Does this work contribute to the values that you want to manifest in the world, to the kind of person that you want to become, to the money that you want to earn, the flexibility that you want to have? And so for me, it did all of those things, but I wasn't actually going to have the same kind of flexibility anymore. And I sort of looked around. I was like, well, I've got kids in middle school. I kind of want to have some flexibility. I don't want another boss. And then the last is control. How much personal agency do you
Yes.
have over how much
Yes.
money you make, what projects you're assigned, how people control your time, how much your hustle puts money back in your pocket, et cetera. How does it affect your career trajectory? And I realized that I was going to have zero control over that. And as an entrepreneur, we
Mm.
entrepreneurs are control freaks, right? So even though
No
we live in a
kidding.
world there's no control whatsoever, we still have control over the fact that there's no control. And so when I looked at all of this, I was like, well, actually, that doesn't make any sense for me. But so when we're in these moments of stepping off of one ladder and onto another, really thinking about what gives you consonance across calling, connection, contribution, and control will help you not to understand exactly what you want to do or don't want to do, but it will just give you a better picture of what matters to you today so that you can start having conversations that allow you to figure those things out.
Yeah. That's a beautiful framing. Do you consider what you've just described as being a lifelong mindset and set of practices, or more exclusively focused on work?
Oh, I think it's lifelong, and I think it's on in every part of your life. So, I think about every 5 to 7 years we sort of reinvent ourselves. When Limitless first came out, I did like 150 podcasts, and the worst question I got asked on like probably 65% of these podcasts was, "What advice would you give your 22-year-old self?" And I was like, "My 22-year-old self, first of all, my 22-year-old self is not going to listen to an old 53-year-old lady, like not a chance. Number one. Number two, even if I did know myself enough at 22, the world around me has changed so much, right? Like a 22-year-old listening to a podcast that was recorded over the internet that I'm hearing through my AirPods on my cell phone, like none of those things existed when I was 22. So even if I could give myself advice, the world has changed so much. So I
Mm.
think a lot of people came out of the pandemic saying when life goes back to normal, is the normal I'm going back to really the life I want? And for most of us, the answer was no. Like a lot of us made some changes during that time. And so even if you know who you are, the world changes around you. So like you get married, you have kids, the kids, maybe you get divorced, maybe you buy a house, maybe the kids leave, maybe the kids come back. Like things change in our lives so often. And
Yes.
then, so we're changing as well. So I think we have to continue to go back in and ask ourselves, based on the information that I have, the world events around me, the God forbid diagnoses that have happened, whatever the things are, do I still care about the same things? And very personal anecdote to this. In 2021, I got really sick, like with a super rare autoimmune disease that about 800 people in the entirety of the United States have ever been
Very sorry
diagnosed
to hear
with.
that.
So, when my doctor finally figured out what it was, I was like, come on, man, 800 people? Like, I'm special, but I'm not that special. And he was like, well, according to the 32 blood tests, the 4 chest x-rays, the biopsies, it would appear that you are. And I was like, awesome. So I'm fine now. I'm in remission. You don't need to worry about me. But I spent most of 2021 not knowing if I was going to see 2022. And when I finally got to the other end of this, after 10 months of chemo, biologic infusions, all I wanted to do was live. I wanted to go out and do all the things and be in all the places and eat all the foods and try everything. And my husband came out of it very much like, I must protect her. Let's avoid risk. Let's like keep everything small. And we were sort of in this place where, there was like this unspoken tension between us. And then I finally was like, baby, like, we got to figure this out, because we got one life, and it has become very, very clear to me that life could be very, very much shorter than we expect. And I want to live, and I need you to live with me, because I can't do this and you can't do that. And so the things that happen to us also affect all the other people around us in ways that we don't always see and we don't always appreciate. And so just having those moments to check in about what gives you consonance at work, what gives you consonance at home, what gives you consonance in your relationship, how other people around you are affected by your changing and evolving needs as well, I think is really important. And if not every 5 to 7 years, more often probably.
Yeah. Such an important conversation, and often we hold that back, or we make limiting assumptions about ourselves and other people. So I'm so pleased you had that conversation. I guess I'm now wondering about questions and making sure it's not one of those crappy questions that you just referred to, and it wasn't going to be the 22-year-old self. I guess I always ask authors and advisors whether they practice what they preach. And I'm particularly curious, in your latest book, Wonderhell, what was the part of that book that you struggle with the most, living and practicing and using? Because none of us are perfect. Even you, Laura, are not perfect. So what have you struggled with the most?
Oh, well, I wrote the book because I needed the book, right? Limitless came out, and it debuted at number 2 on the Washington Post bestseller list, right behind Michelle Obama. And I was so exhausted from the work it took to get that book out that my humility was like disappeared. I didn't have space in my brain to hold that along with everything else. And when my publisher called me and said, number 2, and I was like, number 2, what does it take to be number 1? Like, I just suddenly had this moment. And once I imagined that, like, Washington Post, what if I did the Wall Street Journal? What if I could be number 1? What if I could, right? And as soon as I started feeling that, I couldn't unfeel it. As soon as I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. And so I went on this pilgrimage where I was interviewing all these people, as I mentioned. And for me, the hardest part of writing that book was figuring out how to organize it. Because Limitless was like, we've been given this definition of success, and it doesn't work for us. And here's why. And here's what success should really look like: calling, connection, contribution, control. That gives you consonance. And then here's how to change your workplace, how to change your career, how to change yourself to get it. Very linear path, super easy. But when we find ourselves on that precipice, right? Like 10 toes over the edge of incompetence, and we see that there's a potential out there, but we don't quite know how to get there. We don't quite know if we're going to survive the next like hurdle to get past the promotion, the process change, the policy, whatever the thing is that we want to do, that we see, that we're excited about, that we realize that we're hungry for, even if we didn't even know it existed last week, last month, or last year. The emotions that come at you can be anything. And so the hardest part of the book was figuring out how to organize the book. And so that's why it's organized as an amusement park. Because you walk into the amusement park and you can decide to go on the roller coaster first, or the merry-go-round first, or go to the midway first. everybody wants to do it in a different order. And so figuring out how to do that was really difficult. And so the book is organized as like Imposter Town, Doubtsville, Burnout City, all with these rides that evoke the emotions that you're going to feel when you're there. And so for me, still, the hardest part about Wonderhell is that every time I find myself in the next Wonderhell or the next Wonderhell or the next one after that, I'm constantly surprised at which emotion flies at me, whether it's burnout or exhaustion or envy or doubt or this insecurity, the imposter syndrome. And each time one of those emotions comes at me, it's like I have to learn how to negotiate my relationship with that emotion all over again. So right now, I'm dealing with envy. I'm dealing with envy as one of those emotions because I've just leveled up to this next place, right? I've just become an official contributor to the ABC television network, right? Good Morning America, all of this stuff, this goal that I set for myself at the beginning of the year. And I was like, I don't know, like, who knows? Can I do it? Like, they don't have a career expert. I'm going to tell them they need one. Doesn't even exist, but like, it's got to be someone. Why not me? And so I proposed it and we spent a year working towards it and I finally got it. And now I look around and I'm like posting it on social media and I look around and I'm like, wait, but this person got that thing and this person got that thing and this other person got that thing. And so I'm looking at my quote unquote peers, other authors and other speakers, and I'm feeling envious. Like, why'd they get that stage? Why'd they get that media hit? Why'd they get that award? How'd they make that list? And what I'm realizing, and this is like real time me like doing my own, therapy here, is that the envy that I have is there because I have misplaced who my peers should be. So if our peers are only the people who do exactly what we do, we're always going to be jealous because they're always going to be showing the super polished highlight reel of their lives. And we're never going to actually see the bloopers. And so I decided that I'm going to change who my peer group is. If I want to be best in class at what I do, then my peer group, whether I know them or not, should be best in class at what they do. So I'm going to look around. I'm going to look at Robin Roberts on Good Morning America. I'm going to look at Richard Branson at Virgin. I'm going to look at the people who are best in class at what they do. And I'm going to be like, you know what? In my brain, those are my peers. And I'm going to look at how they should present themselves in the world. They're not smiles in the front and knives in the back. They're generous. They don't keep score. They're giving. They're abundant. They're wise. They're not like slimy and always trying to like, I'm going to give you this and here I'm selling something else, right? It's just like the way that they put themselves out in the world. And so for me, it is a very long answer to your question of how do I walk my talk? I walk my talk by coming face to face with each emotion that comes at me every time I get to the next level of Wonderhell and learning how to deal with it as this newer version of myself that has evolved since the last time I came face to face with the same emotion.
Yeah. That's it's a more healthy way of using envy. I guess that's the point, to not shutting it away, but actually using it as a springboard to think, okay, how do I take myself? What can I learn from other people who are in new spaces? I mean, you describe yourself as an instigator, motivator, and provocateur. And we don't know each other apart from this conversation, but I've seen you, watched you, and read your work with great admiration. Those words come to mind. That's about giving to others. What do you need to nourish yourself? So specifically, how do you keep yourself at the whatever game you want to play? But what stimulates you? What lifts you up?
There's a term that my kids use, stan, right? Like a super fan is a stan. Like you're so in it, like all of the canon. I am a stan of stans. Like if somebody is just into something, I'm into it. It could be stamp collecting. It could be studying slugs. It could be Taylor Swift. It could be the Wicked movie, whatever. If you are into it, I am into it. Like, when somebody comes to you and they tell you about something, that's like thing that they love and it just lights them up. You could just tell that they're just like super nerdy about it. Like that is my favorite person to sit next to at a cocktail party. I will just all day long, I'm like, teach me every single thing you know about rocks. Cool. Love it. Doesn't even matter if I could care less about rocks. What lights me up is somebody who is lit up. When you uncover that thing, that story they weren't planning on telling, but then they go deep and they get so nerdy about it.
That's infectious.
Yeah, that's
I love that. Love that energy. Love that energy. And this is definitely not the last podcast, so don't take this question the wrong way. But what impact are you looking to have on the world around you at a more philosophical level through all your work, your endeavors, your spirit?
So, I have these big, crazy, huge goals and I set these projects for myself, and I've never met a revolution I didn't like, and I love the big idea. But the truth is that the only legacy I really want to leave is I just want people to say when I'm gone that their life was just a little bit better because I was in it.
That's
And
beautiful.
honestly, I don't know that any of us can hope for anything more.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. Coming back to the day to day now, when you're having the best possible day, which of course this is one of them, he says with a cheekiness, what are the habits, what are the practices in your own self that help you do your best work?
Well, usually they start with a great podcast like this.
Touche.
But no, in all seriousness, a good
Be serious.
conversation. No, good conversation, serious conversation.
Mm.
I am constitutionally incapable of small talk. Like I really,
Really?
I want to care about what you're doing for the holidays, but I just don't. I just don't. I want to care. I want to know what you care about. I want to know what lights you up. I want to know what upsets you. I want to know where your righteous indignation comes from. My
Yeah.
gosh, that word is difficult this morning. Usually it starts with a workout, like a run, going rowing on the Charles River, just like running the Harvard Stadium. I didn't do that this morning, so my brain is not quite as alive, which is why I couldn't come up with that word. But it usually starts with like physical movement and then good, deep conversation and some time writing. I think it was Aeneas Nin who said, I don't know what I think about something until I've written about it. Maybe Joan
Mm.
Didion also said that in a different type of, I think both of them had the same idea. And I'm happy to be mentored by either of them in my brain palace. I think spending time deep in reflection, in thought, and then just good nurturing food and good nurturing people. Like it's pretty plain. It's not.
Mm.
I'm. It's possibly because I spent the years between 21 and 25 years old working in the White House and being in the Oval Office and meeting all manner of fascinating politicians and celebrities that I'm not. I don't care that much about title or fame.
Mm.
I
Mm.
care much more about depth and humanity than I do about prestige.
It's so refreshing in this conversation to speak with somebody who clearly has big goals, big ambition, wants to do amazing things and recognizes their place, I guess, in the world and the contribution you want to have. Because some people, it's easy to lose sight of it. I'm an amazing person. It's like, well, how good are you to your kids or to your friends or to your family? You come across as somebody who's grounded, playful, has a good sense of humor, and also wants to do properly good work and learn from people who do properly good work. I mean, that's refreshing. That's
It's
refreshing.
very interesting. When I first started speaking, a friend of mine, Mitch Joel, he's a
Mm.
dear friend. He's like my brother from another mother. He recommended me to speak at an event in Canada, and this was like, I don't know, my third speech I'd ever given in my entire life. And there's 2,500 people. I was literally opening for Malala, like Malala. And I mean, there were like four people on the undercard and Malala. So I one of four people opening for Malala, and it was the Art of Leadership for Women event. And I'm backstage, and he'd recommended me for this, right? To a good friend of his who ran the event. And he texted me, he said, "How are you doing?" And I said, "I'm freaking the F out." And he was like, "Why?" And I'm like, "Because there's 2,500 people, Malala. Oh my God, I don't even know if I know my talk well enough. I'm really scared." And he wrote back, like, "You're coffee. Get over yourself." And I was like, "What do you mean I'm coffee?" And then he said, no matter how much the event organizer is paying you to speak there, I can 100% guarantee that the line on their budget for coffee is a bigger number. Know your place. And what he was trying to tell me in
I get
his
it.
way was, you're not that important, right? Like, you may be the one under the spotlight, but the audience is the star. So just like, it's not about you, it's about them. So if you show up in service to them, then you're going to do fine. And literally on my website, it says like, why do people love booking Laura? And it's like, there are 5 reasons. And one of them is Laura's coffee. And I tell that little story.
Yeah.
And I never actually say it to my speaking clients, but probably about half the time I get off stage, the event organizer goes, "Wow, you really are coffee." And I was like, "Thank you. Thank you very much." So I do it's very hard in this industry where we literally work to get standing ovations to not feel like you're the star, right? But people, like, I can guarantee that people leave the events where I speak and 6 months later, they might not remember my name, but they may remember something I said.
Yes.
And honestly, that's so much more important to me than them remembering my name.
Yeah. I love how you really search out new possibilities. You're comfortable with paradoxes, and you know yourself. I mean, that's refreshing. It's moving. It's been a great conversation. Wow. Wow. Where can people find out more about you and your brilliant work on your, at the time we're recording, new website, I should say?
Yes, my brand new website. So my name is Laura Gassner Otting. You can find me at lauragasnerotting.com. All my good friends call me LGO. So you can also find me at Hey, 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 LGO, on anywhere, obviously anywhere you're on your socials. And if, by the way, I mentioned assessing where you are right now to figure out how much calling, connection, contribution, and control you want. You can also do that at limitlessassessment.com.
Yeah, we'll put that in the show notes. That's a great tool, great research. LGO, Laura, thank you for that wonderful, wonderful conversation. That was another edition of Lance Fear on the Line. I do hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Please do check out the other episodes in the series. Sign up to the YouTube channel, to the podcast. Be generous, be limitless in the rating you give us. And LGO, Laura, thank you ever so much again.
Thank you so much. It was a great conversation.
Thank you.